Hey everybody, it's First Warn Storm Team Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich. Thought I'd do a vlog about the winter forecast. So if you missed it on TV or online or the written article, here's my discussion about what went into the winter forecast this year. And it's hard to imagine. I've done this for 16 years in a row, and it's amazing. Out of the 16 years, this is year 16, the last 15 years I can verify about 10 out of 15. So it's about a 66% chance of getting it right. Now, I'll be honest with you, seasonal forecasting is incredibly difficult in some instances because there's a lot of wild cards you always can't see. Plus, it's actually somewhat easy in some cases because unlike day-to-day weather where it's a specific temperature, rainfall, snowfall amount, I'm just looking, is it going to be above average, below average compared to what we normally see? So let's get right to the details of what's going to happen this year. So if you saw my on-air article or online forecast, one of the biggest determining factors for our winter weather is what we call Enso. Now, Enso is an acronym for El Nino Southern Oscillation. That means the phase of El Nino, La Nina, or what you're going to hear a lot about this year, neutral or Lunada phase. You may have never heard of that phase, but I'll explain what that is. But first of all, this is what El Nino is. El Nino is warmer than average water here in the equatorial Pacific. So the equator goes right here. Water near the equator in the Pacific Ocean is above normal. So it's warmer than it normally is. That typically means cold and wet winters for us. We had this set up last year, and while we had a wet winter, we didn't have a really cold winter, which is one of the problems with this type of setup. You tend to get a better storm track with precipitation than you do with temperatures. Now, Lunada is when we don't have anything in there. So let me go back here real quick. La Nina, you've heard of La Nina. That means the water temperature here in the Pacific is cooler than average. So those two you've heard of. But what happens if neither of those are taking place? We get something that we call the neutral phase, or what we actually have kind of jokingly called La Nada for years, but now is becoming more mainstream. And La Nada doesn't mean no snow or no rain or no winter. It means no warm water, no cold water, just nothing, neutral, normal. So why is that important? Well, let me show you why, because this graphic is really, really important here. And this is one I've been doing research on for several years. I'm going to move my webcam over here. Now, I've actually looked back since 1950. So what I've done is I've looked at every year that there's been an El Nino, a La Nina, or a neutral year, or what we call La Nada. And I averaged up all the snow during those types of winters. And the first thing you notice is El Nino winters, we typically get more snow than average. And the most important fact you need to know for the Charlotte area, our average snowfall is 4.3 inches. So roughly about 4.3, 4.4. La Nina years, pretty much average snow. But look at La Nada, or neutral years. It is by far the biggest total we see on this chart. 5.9 inches per year in neutral years. In fact, the all-time snowiest winter in Charlotte's record books, which go back 140 years, is 1959 and 1960. We had almost 24 inches of snow. So 2 feet of snow fell that winter. That's the biggest snow that we've ever had in any winter, and that was a La Nada or neutral year. Some of our biggest events have happened. Now, it doesn't work out every year. Remember, this is an average since 1950, so there's going to be ups and downs, but the average overall is much higher. In the last 10 years, you can see our average is only 4 inches. Last 30 years, 3.5, but all time, going back 141 years, our all-time average is 5.6 inches. So when you look at this, there's clearly something going on in those La Nada years. Now, why do I think there's going to be a La Nada or a neutral phase? Well, pretty simply, I'm going to move my cursor or move my camera down here real quick. I'm actually going to hide myself briefly here, so don't worry, I will be back. You can see the forecast for this year. The gray is the neutral phase through December, January, February, and January, February, March. So there's a very high probability of seeing a neutral phase this year. So when I look at that, I also look at something you may have heard me refer to as Siberian snowfall in October. Now that might seem like a weird thing, and if you're not a winter weather nut, you're probably not familiar with this. One of the biggest factors for cold and snow, especially on the east coast of the U.S., is was there a above average snowfall in the autumn, in particular October, in what we call Eurasia, which is basically Siberia. And if you look, we had almost 100% of average snowfall there. And if I bring up the averages here, departure from average, you can see most of Siberia, in fact, most of Northern America, had above average snowfall in October. That's usually a sign of cold and snow. Now, one of the other things I look at is Arctic sea ice. You might have heard me refer to this, and this is where the climate change part of this comes in. I'll see if I can get this to show up. Here we go. So Arctic sea ice anomalies, which is the amount of sea ice in the Arctic, has been trending way down. I mean, look at that. It's crazy. Here we are almost near record lows again. We're not going to probably be this low, but we're pretty close to all-time record lows. So why is that important? Well, one of the things that makes this important is this actually causes big buckles in the jet stream. And this is actually one of the things we look for. So this is the current sea ice concentration as of today, as I record this. This was as of yesterday. You can see the yellow line here is where the sea ice normally is. And you can see there's big gaps in there. So why is that important for forecasting winter weather? Well, what this does is it causes a lot of amplification of the jet stream. And what I mean by amplification is we get a lot of kinks, ups and downs in the jet stream. This is what brings us the wild swings in weather during the winter month. This can bring us really cold and snowy winter, but it also can bring us a hot, dry winter, which has happened quite a bit. The fact that there's no sea ice up here causes the jet stream, instead of being just typically like this, striated, it ends to start going like that. And that wild kinkiness to the jet stream causes all types of issues. So let's get to the forecast here. First things first, we'll get to the snow and ice because that's the one everybody wants to hear about. So I'm actually forecasting above average snowfall for the mountains, well above, and for the Piedmont, I'm forecasting above average snowfall. But here's the big caveat to this. Even though I'm forecasting above average snowfall, I'm actually forecasting above average temperatures. Now, I actually was telling my wife about this today, and she's like, what do you mean? It's going to be warm and snowy? Here's the thing about winters in the Southeast. Cold winters tend to be dry because as cold air surges south, it forces the storm track down into the Gulf Coast. And we get a lot of Arctic high pressure, but we don't get any moisture. So it's cold, but it's super dry. In winters like we're going to see this go round, the Lunada winters, we have this perfect setup where the jet stream is basically right over us. The cold air is just to the north. So it's really wet in here. And even though the warm air can surge north in between storms, every once in a while the cold air surges down and you get big storms. So I equate this to a home run hitter in baseball. It's either a strikeout or a home run. That's this type of winter. We're going to get probably several storms, but in between those storms, it's probably going to be pretty warm. So that will skew the temperature average above, but the snowfall average will be above as well. Because remember, 4.3 is only our snowfall average. So it takes very little to actually crank us up above average. And part of the reason we're going to be above average is it's going to be another wet winter. If you had to give me one parameter, if you love snow, and I'm a snow lover just like everybody, I'm a skier. So if I want snow, I would much rather have the moisture because it's a lot easier to time out one cold shot with an active storm track than it is to say, we've got all this cold air, but we can't get the storm track in here. It's just too dry. That the whole term of it's too cold to snow actually does somewhat apply here in the Carolinas because that typically means the storm track has been suppressed or pushed to the south. So when I look at the parameters I look at overall, and this is my checklist for this upcoming winter, I'm actually going to move my head here in the middle. El Nino, La Nina phase, we're in La Nada. So La Nada typically means warm and wet. Okay, above average snowfall in Siberia. That would favor cold and wet. Arctic sea ice near record lows. That would favor warm and wet. But more importantly, this favors a lot of extremes. And then climate change. Just the fact that it's been warmer than average and we got really warm water in the Gulf of Mexico and off the east coast of the United States, that also would favor warm and wet. So the one thing you see is we've got consistently wet signatures showing up in the checklist, but I also think it's warm. But because of this signature right here being so wet, and we have just one, if you have that much moisture and you can time out one cold outbreak with the wet pattern, you're going to get big storms. So if we get one storm that gives us 6 inches of snow, and that's the only storm we see all winter, folks, that's above average snowfall. It could be one big storm and then nothing the rest of the winter. That's above average snowfall. So that's why my forecast is for above average snowfall, but warmer than average temperatures. That's how it works out. We just need a one or two big storms, and boy, we get above average snowfall. And then we get 7 weeks of warm weather. Guess what happens? It's going to be a warm winter. So that's why the forecast ended up being the way it is. And I wanted to explain that in a little more detail. And just to show you what the trend has been here in the Carolinas, this is the trend in snowfall. And I'm going to remove my face here real quickly. We'll pop it out of there. The snowfall trend since the 50s has been down. And if I look at temperatures in that same time frame, the temperature's been up. So snowfall trends have been down while snowfall has trended down as well as temperatures going up. So that's why I take climate change into a consideration, because it slaps you in the face. The pattern, I mean, consistency of pattern just should tell you we're going to see warm weather. But I will tell you as well, the fact that we've had such low snowfall totals, the last time we had above average snowfall was 2014. So we're kind of overdue for above average snowfall. And that's another reason why I'm hinting at above average snowfall this year. So that's kind of some of the science that goes into this. I look at a lot of other parameters. I look at MJO, and a lot of people look at teleconnections. There's a lot of short-term parameters which we really won't see come into effect until we get into the winter, like the North Atlantic Oscillation. You might hear terms like Arctic Oscillation. Those only give us like a lead time of a week or two. And here in November, that doesn't really help us out. These other teleconnections I look at give us lead time of months or seasons. So that's what I look at. So bottom line is I expect above average snowfall because I expect a wet winter, which means one or two big storms. But I also expect in between those big storms, it's probably going to be warm and pretty wet. Hope that helps kind of explain the scientific part of this for you. All these graphics are on our website, wcnc.com. I've got the video from the night I debuted this on Thursday night. And of course, you can watch everything right here as well. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. I'll try to get to them over the next couple days. I won't promise I'm going to get to them tonight. I'm hanging out with the family. It's pizza night here with the kids. But as we go through the weekend, I'll work Sunday night. I'll try to get in there and answer as many questions as possible. Snow lovers, this is good news for you. We're probably going to see above average snow. But if you want a cold, dry winter, this probably isn't the winter for you.